Hey Terry, you want
my shield.
Vsauce, Michael here. Hey, Vsauce, Michael here.
Hello and welcome to my build overview video for Spectral Shield Throw Trickster in Path of Exile 319, Lake of Kalandra. This video is intended to demonstrate a fair expectation of how this build performs. A quick forewarning, this will not be a comprehensive guide. I will touch on a lot of things and talk in detail about things such as gearing, but this was my second build this league, which means I started this build with an amount of currency that was adequate to purchase and craft gear that made this character ready to map tier 16s with my fully juiced Atlas passive strategy. Basically, what I'm trying to say is I don't necessarily understand how this build would function if you're on a budget or if you're considering making this your very first character of the league. But to give you a decent idea of the amount of currency invested into the build during all of the footage that you've already seen and are currently watching, I totaled everything up, absolutely everything, and I have spent at most 85 divines. But if that amount of currency feels unrealistic to you right now, please keep in mind that most of this total is derived from a handful of very expensive components that should certainly not be considered mandatory, such as the Grand Spectrum Jewel that provides minimum frenzy charges. Immediately following when I finished leveling the Trickster character, around level 70 or so, I probably had somewhere around only 30 divines invested in the build at that time, and it felt pretty good for mapping in order to make currency to afford the more expensive components that I now have. In case you're wondering how I actually leveled the Trickster, I simply purchased all those generic strong leveling items, and I blew through the axe with ease using a 5-linked Spectral Helix, a couple of DPS auras, and it only took me about 4 hours of game time. So next, I'd like to give you my personal rating 1 out of 10 for each component of the build, or in other words, pillars of what make a build a build. So these pillars are the following: map clearing, boss killing, survivability, and playstyle comfortability. Basically, how good is the build at clearing maps, killing bosses, not dying, and how does it feel to play? So for map clearing, I'm gonna say it's a 7 out of 10. Very good. This build is fast, and occasionally it's very fast. We have a lot of movement speed. We have 2 different easy to use movement abilities, which is Flame Dash and Shield Charge. So moving around, it feels great. The only problem is that the skill itself, the mechanics of Spectral Shield Throw, is occasionally quite clunky. It's basically a skill shot. It's not just like a aimbot. You actually have to aim. I'm only giving it a 7 out of 10 because of the fact that the skill is kind of mechanically clunky. But honestly, I would say it personally feels like it should deserve a higher rating. In terms of the DPS, as far as like clearing packs of enemies, it's really, really good. The actual damage doesn't necessarily propagate to the entire pack of enemies, but you'll kill a big enough chunk to quickly move on to the remainder of the chunk. So it's totally fine. So for boss killing, once again, I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10. The single target DPS feels really, really good. My DPS right now is 10 something million, which is quite good. And that is considering that the perfect scenario setup, such as the totem that you put down, you're basically doing all of the DPS possible. As long as you pop a flask, use your onslaught. It's all very simple stuff to actually do that 11 million DPS. And yeah, it's great. One thing to note for boss killing is you will occasionally get scenarios like you saw when I was fighting Maven at the start of the video, where whenever you're hitting the boss and you use mark on hit support to mark the target with sniper's mark, it will actually send a lot of other shield throws towards other enemies in the area, and it tends to target the enemies very, very well. Basically, as soon as I hit one enemy, everything around the enemy is also then taking damage and is also then frozen. So that's really nice. A good example of this is whenever you walk into one of the 4 rogue exiles, all you gotta do is hit one of them once and they're all frozen at the same time, and it feels really nice. So let's talk about survivability. This is potentially the weakest point of the build, unfortunately. I was hoping that it was gonna be very tanky, but it turns out that it is most of the time, but it also is occasionally going to die to a physical damage one-shot, and that is because this build gets a lot of extra bonus from investing into evasion instead of armor. Because of the position on the tree and because of the ascendancy nodes, we would like to have evasion. We would not like to have armor. It's way easier for us to get a lot of evasion as it is to get armor, basically, so we might as well go for evasion. To be honest with you, this is really the very first time I've ever played a build that was focused on evasion. And for that reason, it's entirely possible that I'm doing something wrong, and there's something that I don't really understand about evasion-based builds. But from what I do understand, we have a hybrid of life and energy shield. We have glancing blows, which comes from our shield, and we also have a specific unique modifier on the shield. Damage that we block and damage that we don't block works differently than normal. Because we're using this shield, because this shield is best in slot, we are trying to make the build able to survive the downside that the shield provides, which is the fact that certain hits will go right through energy shield, and then certain hits will not. We actually benefit a lot from having a decent balance of both of those two things, having a nice hybrid build, life and energy shield. So because of this also means that our life pool is not necessarily going to be super high. And because we have evasion and glancing blows, damage that we block is still going to actually go through. In that case, if damage goes through our block and it goes through our evasion, so if we don't block it, or if we do block it or don't block it, and then if we don't evade it, the hit, we then take that damage straight to our life pool, and it's possible for that damage to instantly kill us. It's rare, but it does happen. You will notice occasionally a strong monster with a big physical damage attack will either bring you to a really low amount of health, or it will just straight up kill you. This is the reason why we use Immortal Call on cast when damage taken, because when we do take that damage, we have Immortal Call to then hopefully protect us from the remainder of our health, then quickly also going down, because we have that damage reduction for the next second or so. So anyways, the build is actually very tanky. However, there are times, if we get very unlucky, where we can just simply die. I will say that I didn't really have much of a problem leveling all the way to 96, which I am so far, and leveling to 97 has felt pretty okay. It might be difficult to push this build past level 97. It might actually be a bit of a challenge, but most of the power of the build is completed around level 95, 96 anyways, so I'm perfectly okay with the build existing somewhere around 96, 97. So for that reason, I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. Once again, this rating feels like it's rated a bit lower than it should be, because like I said, the build does feel tanky. However, those random one-shots, because of that fact, I just simply can't give it a better rating than 6 out of 10. So I'm gonna rate this one as good. And now for the playstyle comfortability. So like I said earlier, the build is very fast. We can easily get a lot of movement speed, and we have a lot of good movement skills and also we have almost every piece of content in the game available for us to do. Also, a nice added bonus is that we are only really scared of a handful of map mods. The two map mods that I try to avoid are... Hey, so I'm just going to pause the video here for a second to talk about the fact that I forgot to mention Elemental Reflect. That is obviously a problem. We are 100% physical converted to cold damage, which means Elemental Reflect will instantly kill us. Physical Reflect is totally fine though, we take no damage from Physical Reflect, but keep in mind, something that I do is I will go to the trade site and purchase 16 use compasses for one of my watchstones to have on every single map. That makes it so that reflected damage does nothing to me, and also it adds some rare monsters, which is great for juicing. I suggest you do this because they're quite cheap, quite affordable, or if you don't want to, just make sure to look out for Elemental Reflect as well. The two map mods that I try to avoid are simply the action speed of monsters cannot be lowered. That obviously is a problem because we're chilling and freezing, so we'd like that to be able to occur. And also the number one mod that is really bad is cannot leech, because we function based off of mana leech. And then the other thing about why I'm giving this a lower than 10 out of 10 rating, because the build feels great. It's a satisfying skill, but like I said earlier, occasionally you will notice the clunkiness. Mechanically, it doesn't really compare to other skills that are simply just click button, screen dies, you know? Like, it's not really like a full screen clearing skill. So I'm not going to give it higher than an 8 out of 10, but I think that's a very good, a very fair rating, and so I'm going to say it's an 8 out of 10, a great rating. So when you total up these four pillars, you take the average of them, that comes out to 7 out of 10, which is very good. So I would agree with this. The build is very good. I'm very happy with the build. One last thing I'd like to say generally about this build is that I've done this a lot. I've gone from a league starter to a new build a lot of different times in the past, and this was the first time that I found purchasing and crafting the gear to be a very smooth process. I never had really any hiccups. I didn't have any like brick walls that I had to solve. It all worked really well. And then actually putting the gear on and walking into the map for the first time, it just worked. It all worked perfectly well. I didn't see any red flags. It was all just great from that point forward. So yeah, this is the first time I really had a very smooth transition from the leveling character into the, you know, full juiced mapping character. Okay, so I brought you to PoE Ninja here because I think this is going to be a visually more appealing way to show off the gym links. And what I have for you here is two different setups. They're very similar. One of them is the setup. So this is the setup that you're seeing in the video, exactly the same with Tornado. And then this setup is different. It's the one that I have transitioned to, the build that I'm using now. And the only difference between these two setups is that one setup is using Tornado, the other one is not. And instead, the other one is working an Enlightened support into the build in order to fit Herald of Purity. The difference there also means that you have to change your anointment. So if you don't have Herald of Purity, you don't need as much mana reservation efficiency, which means you can go for Heart of Ice on your amulet. Also, you would like to have the Ashes of the Stars. That's kind of a minimum here. This is the amulet that I would consider to be added to the price of that 30 divine minimum that I set for the build, because I find Ashes of the Stars to be so good. It's so effective, and definitely worth the chunk of change that you set up for the build initially. So this build that has the Enlighten goes for Sovereignty, because Sovereignty gives you more mana reservation efficiency. So combine this with the Enlighten and then you can fit Herald of Purity. And Herald of Purity is great because it gives you more physical damage, and it gives you that quality of life of having those minions to soak up a little bit of the aggro from monsters around you. But let's talk more about the actual 6-link setup for the Spectral Shield Throw. You'll notice that both of these builds are using Phantasmal, and that is simply because Phantasmal is by far the best option. Phantasmal Spectral Shield Throw gives you crit multi per energy shield of your shield. And the shield that we use has a lot of energy shield. Sadly, it is literally impossible to go to 400. Even with the perfect base defense roll, quality 30% shield, it will only ever go to 397 or something. It's like so close. So yeah, you can't ever raise it above 400. So the only benefit you'll be getting from Phantasmal is a 3 times multiplier for having 300 ES on the shield, but that's still really good. You'll notice that this guy has 2023 with ashes, which means this number would actually be further increased to like 40 something. I think mine is like 48% multi per 100 ES, which comes out to be like slightly less than 150 crit multi, which is insane. It's so strong that I would suggest that the cost of Phantasmal is also part of the cost of the minimum 30 divines juiced tier 16 Atlas passive strategy farming and all that. The other gems on here are the exact same between these two different builds because these are all the best gems. Elemental damage with attack support, either awakened or not, is good. And then you have energy leech support. This is a cheap gem. Even 2120 is very affordable, and this is great because we are always leeching. Inspiration support is great. This is what enables us to actually cast with a very high attack speed because it reduces the cost of our skill, and also when we get inspiration charges, it gives us more elemental damage. So very good. And then we have awakened vicious projectiles as well as awakened cold penetration. These are both also best in slot. And if you cannot afford the awakened versions, the normal versions are also best in slot. They just give us the most DPS. It's quite simple to figure that out using PoB. Moving up to the helmet, both of these builds are doing the same thing. It's Vortex with Unbound Elements and Bone Chill. So the reason why this is good is because these two skill gems basically just make the chilling effect of Vortex really strong. And that's all it is there for. It's not for DPS. It's simply just to chill. What you end up doing is you put Vortex on your movement key, and then as you're moving, you're casting Vortex on the ground. So it's great for bossing because you don't have to think about it. It just happens, and it chills the boss very easily in times, like during moments where you're not hitting the boss. It's also just good to have Vortex on the ground as you're mapping because if something were to run behind you, run up to you, or jump at you or something, they happen to fall into your Vortex, they're going to be chilled, whether you hit them or not, so that's good. And we have an open slot here just for simply adding Tempest Shield. It just gives us our max spell block, so that's good. We have a cast when damage taken setup with Immortal Call, like I mentioned earlier. Very simple. This one's on life tap. You don't actually need to have it on life tap. For this setup, you have it on just, straight up, just cost mana. And the reason why you take it off of light tap is because you simply need that green gem to put precision right there. Down here on this setup, you have Flame Dash on life tap, and you might think to yourself, oh, that might be necessary. It's actually not. This build has Flame Dash without life tap because once again, the amount of mana that you're casting for Flame Dash is actually not a problem. Only if you're using a ring that has the prefix of non-channeling skills -7 to mana cost. This helps out a lot with casting your Immortal Call, casting your Flame Dash, and everything else. So if you don't have a ring that has that prefix, you might want to go with life tap on everything. Okay, so keep that in mind. Basically, like I said, the builds are very similar, and that's true. I'm not going to really go into detail too much here, but both builds use Flame Dash and Shield Charge, and they are both linked to nothing special. Like I said, this is not necessary to have this linked. And over here you have Flame Dash and Shield Charge linked to nothing. These are not doing anything to these individual skills. These are simply just there to exist as a socket. You also have your Ancestral Protector and your Blood Rage. Once again, nothing special about these links. On the other build, you have it in his Aura setup, so it doesn't do anything there. And then you have Blood Rage linked to Tornado, which of course does nothing as well. I was using this setup during the recording of all the footage that you're watching in the background earlier. And I gotta say, Tornado is pretty good, but I wanted to get rid of it because I liked the idea of having more auras, such as Herald of Purity, and having a little bit of an easier time doing that perfect DPS. So for this build, to do your perfect DPS, you put down a totem, you cast your tornado, you attack your tornado with the Spectral Shield Throw skill so that it powers the tornado. And of course, you want to also be casting your Blood Rage and pop your flask. And that's really all you can do to do the most DPS, right? For this build, however, you literally just put the totem down and you cast Blood Rage. So you just hit 2 buttons, and you're good to go. One thing I didn't mention though is that the only setup with a life tap that does matter depending on either build is life tap with your Sniper's Mark, because Sniper's Mark is a significant amount of mana that you will be casting every time you hit something that is rare or unique. So if you're hitting a bunch of rare or uniques in quick succession, it's going to cost too much mana. So therefore you have to put this on life tap. That is really the whole description of all the gem links, depending on which variant of build you're playing. Of course, there are builds that exist without Ashes. There are builds that exist with Pandemonious, and there are builds that exist with Omniscience. Those builds I'm not familiar with. They're going to be entirely different depending on their gem setup. So if you decide to buy Ashes, which I would suggest you do, then I would suggest you follow either of these 2 gem setups. Okay, so up next, I'm going to walk you through every single piece of gear, how I obtained these items, how I crafted them, how I searched for them on the market and whatnot. And starting off with the easy part, let's talk about the shield. So this is where the damage comes from. Spectral shield throw scales off of your shield's defenses. That could be any of the 3 types of defenses: armor, energy shield, or evasion. Basically, the bigger number, the more damage. And so Emperor's Vigilance is quite affordable as a base price. You'll see it's only about 10 chaos. And I promise, if you're on a budget and you purchase literally any one of these shields, it will be good, because the only thing that ever varies between this shield, depending on the rolls, is the chance to block spell damage, which were capped regardless of that roll. And then you have the base defense of the actual shield. You'll notice that mine is 162 armor, 34 ES. So this is a fairly good roll. If you want to spend more money and get a better shield, I would suggest you look for a better base defense roll. And the easiest way to do that, let me show you real quick. So in the trade site here, you can simply go to the base percentile for minimum defenses, and let's just search for 100%. This means these will be perfect shields. So these have the perfect roll on the armor and energy shield. This has no quality, so it helps a lot if you add quality to it as well, by the way. So let's say you want to spend like 80 chaos, right? You can just sort of lower this number until you find one that's well, perfect. I promise I didn't practice this. So here you go, 80 chaos, listed 29 minutes ago. So yeah, if you want to get a shield, if you want to spend a little bit more money to get a better shield, that's a good way of doing that. You'll notice that mine has 2 good implicits: reduced damage taken from projectiles and fizz damage as some other type of damage. This is quite expensive because this has good implicits while also being a fairly good roll on the base defenses. So that's another option. If you want to spend like multiple divines for the shield, you can do that. You can search for like, okay, like 90% minimum and then put in your good implicits, right? And then once it's corrupted because it has the implicits, you can then very easily just use these things right here. They're about 1 chaos a pop, and the best quality that this can bring it to is 29, which is kind of funny. It only took me like 30 total to get 29, so not too bad. Okay, next up, let's talk about the weapon. So you might wonder, okay, so if the damage is scaling off the shield, then what's the best thing to have in the main hand? Well, it's simply a stat stick. That's what this is. This is a stat stick. So you're going to be using a rapier base because the foil base has 25% global crit multi. The rapier base has an implicit of 35% global crit multi. And that is a global stat, so it just gives us more crit multi. It has nothing to do with the weapon itself. So go for like an item level 86 sword, just to give you an idea of what that costs. So global crit multi on the implicit, minimum roll of 35, item level 86, has Shaper Influence, so one-handed weapon, and check it out. Pretty affordable. These are all like less than 10 chaos, so the base of the weapon itself is quite affordable. So once you got your weapon, you're going to simply throw the Sorrow Essence until you see that tier 1 fizz as extra cold. So there's the tier 3, not good enough. Okay, there we go. So we got the tier 1 here with an open prefix, so that's pretty lucky. It cost us estimated price of 78 chaos. That's probably going to be like over 100 because of the cost of these essences in bulk. And then at this point, so let's pretend, let's slam this and pretend that we had, oh no, we have cold damage. So you're just going to annul it and you missed, so you got to redo it, right? So that's that idea. But then if you're in this situation where you have an open suffix, you can very simply come down to the benchcraft. Prefixes cannot be changed. That's going to cost you 2 divines, scour, and then multi-mod costs grand total of 4 divines to do both of these meta mods. So you're going to craft the best global crit you can possibly craft. And then you're going to go to prefixes on the bench craft, and you're going to craft that cold modifier. So you can see here the tier 1 for just straight up flat cold is 45 to 54, but then the one you get from June missions is 51 to 60. So it's just simply more cold damage, and then you also have that chance to freeze, which helps out a lot as well. Boom. This is a bad roll, unfortunately. But you're basically done at that point. Your weapon is very strong, very good for the build, and then just slam something. So that does nothing. That's unfortunate. Let's pretend we get cold resistance. That's actually helpful. Very good. Pretend we do this. That does nothing. That does nothing. That does nothing. That's actually quite good. That would be amazing, actually. Holy shit. Life on kill. Ooh, tier 1 cold res. That would be fucking sick too. So there's a lot of options that are good, and there's no options that are bad. There's not a single option that's going to be detrimental to the build. So you might as well just slam. It's like, what, it costs 12 chaos for an exalt nowadays? So just slam it when you're done, and you're good to go. Okay, so next let's talk about the helmet, and we're also going to mention the body real quick, because the theory behind what we do for the helmet and the body revolves around this particular ascendancy right here. So Escape Artist gives us evasion rating for every 1 ES on the helmet. It also gives us 1 ES for every 6 evasion we have on our body. For this reason, we'd like to get a hybrid evasion and energy shield body so that we can get a lot more energy shield from the evasion that the body gives us, and we also get the energy shield that the body gives us. Basically, if you do the math here, I was able to roll this to over 1800 evasion, 200 plus energy shield. So what this is actually giving me to the build is, let's do some math. So this body armor is basically giving me 1,812 evasion and also 514 energy shield. That is a lot of defenses from our body armor. And then on the helmet, we have 306 energy shield, which in turn gives us 1,530 evasion. So basically, because we're taking this as ascendancy node, you're going to want to craft or purchase your 2 pieces of gear here based around that. And so for this helmet, what I did was I purchased the base with the lab enchant. So this is the best energy shield base possible, the Hubris Circlet. And with the lab enchant, it cost me 3 divines. Let's check out the price of it right now. So the price has gone down to around 1 divine, maybe 2 divines. So that's quite affordable in my opinion as far as lab enchanted helmets goes. Like you know, best in slot helmet base lab enchants. That's quite affordable. And then I bought the helmet with the lab enchant, like I said, for 3 divines, and I essence it. I used my life essence because yes, I want to get energy shield, but I also want to get life because I'm a hybrid build, and I managed to get the tier 1 increased energy shield roll. And at which point when I did that, I had the open prefix, crafted the flat ES, and then I'm pretty sure I remember the suffixes were quite bad, so I just used Eldritch crafting to Eldritch Chaos Orb the suffixes to something better. And what I got was good enough for me at the time. Looking at it right now, it's kind of bad. Those are pretty bad rolls on the suffixes, but it's totally fine. It does what I needed to do. So that's basically all there is to the helmet. And the implicits on the helmet are also not super important. I could get that damage penetrate to a higher value, but that's fine for now. And then the reduced mana cost of attacks combined with our inspiration and combined with the prefix on our ring, it means that we have no trouble casting spells that require mana, even when I only have 55 mana to work with. And this is that number is going to go down as I level up my precision as well. So that's the helmet in a nutshell. And let's talk about the body armor. So like I said, you want to get a evasion energy shield base such as Sadist Garb, and there's a bit of a interesting method to do here, right? So let's go to the trade site, right? Because a 6-link body armor can be expensive, let's talk about a way around that. So let's search for Sadist Garb item level 86 with a 6-link. So this is going to show us a 6-link item level 86 Sadist Garb. Okay, oopsie daisies. This is going to show us a not mirrored, not corrupted 6-link item level 86 Sadist Garb. So let's say you're looking for a base to start crafting. Well, guess what? You're going to have to spend 150-ish chaos just for the base, right? But what if I told you that's not even that great? Because if you take a notice here, my body armor has a roll of 491, 107 as the base value, and that is the perfect roll, which helps out a lot. It helps me get that really high number when I start increasing the base. And so having a good base roll helps out a ton when it comes to getting that number even higher with the prefixes on the body armor. So if you come back in the trade site and you say, okay, well, I only want to have one that has a perfect roll. Well, that's going to be a lot more expensive. So the bases that have the perfect rolls of the base defense are going to be multiple divines. To be honest with you, you could just buy this because these prices right now are kind of affordable. A 6-link that is perfect rolled on the base defenses, that actually does sound pretty worth the value, 2 to 3 divines. But I'll show you what I did in case that price is actually increased in the future for some reason. What I did was I simply searched for a Sadist Garb without the 6-link first with the base defenses, and you'll be happy to find out that they're like dirt cheap. So the base itself with the perfect rolls is like a couple chaos. And then I crafted on it from there and I 6-linked it myself, which 6-linking costs like 300 chaos or something on average. So probably slightly more affordable than purchasing that base I showed you earlier. But then the actual crafting of the armor, once again, I basically did the same thing I did on the helmet. I used a deafening essence of flat evasion. I was also using flat life and flat energy shield. It doesn't really matter, but what you're looking for is a good roll of one of the other stats. For example, I rolled flat evasion and then I hit the tier 1 max life. So that was good enough for me. Had I had rolled flat evasion and then hit tier 1 increased evasion energy shield or whatever, I may have stopped there as well and then crafted life or whatever. Basically, you're just going to be rolling until you get some really good prefixes. And at that point, I then did the same thing I did on the helmet where I Eldritch crafted with Eldritch Chaos Orb, Eldritch Exalt, and all that to clean up the suffixes and make some better suffixes. And it only took me a couple tries to get tier 1 intelligence, tier 2 spell suppression. So at that point, I figured we're good to go. For the implicits, you're going to want to look for Hatred Aura Effect. That does a lot of good for your build, a lot of DPS. And I managed to go for the unique enemy because I wanted to have an even greater effect when I'm bossing or when I'm fighting something in the map that's unique. So that's nice. And then for the other one, you're going to want to go for some kind of tier of the non-curse aura effect. It's just simply the best 2 options. Okay, let's briefly discuss the jewelry. So when it comes to the amulet, I already mentioned it earlier. I'll say it again real quick. I think Ashes is the best. There's builds that do more DPS with Omniscience, but that's likely going to be much more expensive, especially considering you have to then craft gear that's good with Omniscience. There's also builds that use Pandemonious, which is pretty good. It's a good amulet, but it's a budget amulet. So if you want to spend more money and you want to have an amulet that enables you to run certain auras and enables you to fix your build in different ways compared to how you might have to do it with the Pandemonious, I would say that saving up that 16 or 17 divines, let's do a quick price check. So it's 17 base, oh, this is sovereignty as well. So it's like 17 base price right now. And if you want to get a relatively good roll on these 2 stats right here, I paid 17 for mine. It looks like right now this one's about 20 minimum. So that price has gone up actually. But you know, it's hard to beat Ashes. Like, it's just so good, especially when you start to use certain alternate quality skill gems. Like Ashes is the reason why, as you can see, I have 48% to crit multi per EES on my shield. Like Ashes is the reason why, as you see here, I have that 48% to crit multi instead of the 20 that it says right there, right? So that's just so incredibly good, and it also does a lot of other things for us. Like it increases our sniper's mark. Instead of 40% increased damage from projectile hits, it goes all the way to 48. So Ashes, it's just an amazing amulet. So I would highly suggest you use Ashes if you can afford it. As far as the rings go, basically you're going to want to get a ton of stats and resistances on your rings. Right here I have over 70 lightning resistance on my ring, because that was necessary. It put me right to the cap. I barely am at cap right here. And also it's great to have strength on your rings, because strength is kind of necessary to run certain gems that we're using. And you want to try to get life, so you know, standard stuff. But I also like to work in the power charge. So having +1 to minimum power charges gives me a constant effect of having crit chance at all times. And then once I kill things, I get a little bit more crit chance, so that's nice. And then you're going to want to have an open prefix for the craft of -7 to total mana cost of non-channeling skills. This is so helpful. It means that we can cast our Spectral Shield Throw multiple times before we actually run out of mana. So I can sit here and cast all day, and if any one of these hits something, I will then instantly leech to full mana. If you don't have a lot of reduction to your mana cost, sometimes you can find it to be kind of annoying where you like cast once or twice, you miss, and then you're out of mana, and that really sucks. So in case you're wondering how I found this ring, what I actually did was I set up a search here. This is quite a specific scenario because I really needed a lot of lightning res. So I searched for minimum 30 strength because that was also necessary. I searched for the power charge stat, which is the one that gives you the +1 to minimum and then more on kill. And then I searched for any amount of extra life, and I searched for one of the implicits here, which gave me lightning resistance on the implicit. And then I searched for a tier 2 roll of any of the elemental resistances because I could just change this to lightning via harvest. And I found these to be pretty relatively active on the trade site. But what I was looking for was some good roll of life, as well as open prefixes to do the benchcraft. So I found this to actually be kind of a rare item to find on the market. I ended up searching for like, I guess since yesterday, so one day. I found one that had tier 1 strength, tier 2 lightning res. So what I did specifically was I did suffixes cannot be changed, and then I reforged life and got the tier 3 life, which is about the same value as if I benchcrafted life on top of it. So I was like, yeah, I'm okay with that because that also then enabled me to use the benchcraft for the mana cost. And then I slammed an Exalt and got rarity. So that's the story of the ring. The other ring is you're probably going to want to use the taming. You could technically forego the taming and use like an amethyst ring or something. You know, what you could do is get 2 amethyst rings to give you a lot of chaos res, and then also work in some of those other stats like strength and a bunch of res on top of the amethyst implicit. But I personally liked to go for the taming instead, because the taming gives you increased damage with hits and ailments per freeze, but also increases your elemental damage flat, and it increases your elemental damage with attack skills, which we benefit from both of those lines of text. It also gives you more chance to freeze, and it gives you all res. So I purchased a taming that had the perfect all res roll. So this ring actually gives me 40% to all elemental resistance, which is really nice. And we benefit from every other line of text. And what you can do is add elemental damage catalysts, which are quite affordable. They're like 2 for 1C. And that makes all of the 30% rolls go up to 36%. But, you know, a belt is technically jewelry, so let's talk about the belt next. This belt is quite interesting. So basically, what I was looking for was chaos resistance with strength, and then I needed to fix my build with another chunk of some other flat resistance. In this case, it was fire. When I got those 3 on the Stygian Vice, because Stygian Vice is great to have a really good Abyss Jewel, when I found those 3 modifiers on a Stygian Vice, what I did was, same thing I did for the ring. Suffixes cannot be changed, reforged life, and that was the only prefix, which is also the best case scenario. Because you're going to want to craft the LE damage with attack skills, and then you use a Redeemer Orb to slam one of the 3 possible Redeemer prefixes. So when you use a Redeemer Exalted Orb to slam a prefix on the belt, you are going to only get these 3 modifiers. Increased evasion, and they all have the same weighting, by the way. Increased evasion rating is obviously the worst one. It's technically good for the build, but these 2 modifiers are so much better in terms of DPS that you really want to get one of these 3 different tiers of each of these 2 modifiers. That's the idea behind the belt. Okay, so next up is the gloves. So the gloves are pretty flexible here. So previously, I mentioned how it mattered to have a high amount of energy shield on your helmet and a high amount of evasion on your body because of the ascendancy. But what that means is that our gloves and our boots slot are free to be really any kind of base you want. It doesn't exactly matter. If you want to have a little bit more energy shield, you can go for an energy shield base or a hybrid base. Same goes for the boots. It doesn't really matter. So the base doesn't matter too much. In fact, you'll notice that I have stealth gloves, which aren't even really the good base. What is the good base? Slink gloves, that's right. And the reason why the reason why I bought a base that wasn't actually a good base is because on the gloves, it's really important for you to get the temple mod, increased damage with hits against chilled enemies. It's a very, very strong DPS mod. I would say that if you were going to get a pair of gloves that had some good stats plus attack speed, compared to a pair of gloves that have good stats plus the temple mod here, you're probably way better off going with the temple mod. Not only is it a lot of DPS, it also just gives you a nice added bonus of having basically tier 1 cold resistance along with it, so that's super nice. And on top of that, you're looking for just generally good stats, and you'd also like to have an open prefix so that you can do the fizz damage converted to cold damage with a divine orb. I actually divined these gloves because I noticed that the temple mod was at like 31%, and I was like, damn, that's a bad roll out of 50, so I divined it, and I got 47, and I was like, all right, cool. And then I noticed, oh fuck, I fucked up the craft, and I don't have this craft yet. I've actually forgotten to go get it again. I had a friend do this for me, but I actually forgot to go do June missions to get the craft myself, and he's probably not online at the moment. Yeah, so I'm gonna have to go do that, but that's beside the point. Like I said, all you're really looking for is the temple mod, increased damage with hits against chilled enemies, and then a bunch of good stats. The other important thing about the gloves are going to be on your implicits. So you're gonna wanna use Eldritch, Ichors, and Embers to get yourself that 2 pierce. Projectiles pierce 2 additional targets is a very strong modifier. This will affect not the shield throw itself, but the projectiles that explode from the shield on each time it chains. So each time the shield will bounce to a different enemy, it will explode, and this right here gives us more projectiles, and then this on the gloves gives us the piercing of those projectiles to 2 separate enemies. So it just makes this is what makes the skill good at clearing, when you have this implicit combined with this lab enchant. Outside of, if you don't have those 2 things, it's still okay, but these 2 things make it really, really good. This is kind of I would consider this to be expensive because it's a little bit of RNG to get, because you have to get all the way up to exquisite. That's when it goes to 2. It starts off at 1. Even 1 is gonna help, obviously, so that's nice, I guess. If you're on a budget, you can just go for projectiles pierce 1, and then it's still beneficial. But if you'd like to get 2, it's a bit of a tricky situation. It's the same way that I got the perfect modifier here for my hatred aura effect. I'll show you exactly how to do it right now. Okay, so let's take the gloves. Doesn't really matter what they are, and it also doesn't matter about any of the mods. So I'm just gonna grab Eldritch stuff here, and I'm gonna pull up another window so we can take a look at the mods themselves. Okay, so here we are on the list of the Eater of Worlds implicits, which means Projectile Pierce is an Eater of World, and you can see it goes, so tier 6 would be lesser, this is greater, grand, exceptional, exquisite, and then perfect. That's how that goes. So I would suggest you start with spamming your grand Ichor, because the reason why I say that is that there isn't really that much of a price difference between greater and grand. I mean, obviously it's 1 chaos, but I think it's more worth it for you to get the tier up to a point where it's only a few steps away from where you want it to be, as opposed to you having to spend more orbs of conflict on average to get it to that point if you start with lesser, for example. So yeah, the grand is usually fairly cheap in bulk. 2 chaos here, and it's 2 chaos on the other one as well. They're pretty similar prices. So you're just gonna spam away until you see that pierce. As you're seeing right now, I'm already 60 deep, and unless I missed it, I haven't seen a single one. There's the unique enemy one again. There we go. Okay, so it took us 87. So probably a little bit worse than average. This is wrong as fuck, by the way. This is not 35 chaos, what the fuck? So what we have to do now is add a exceptional ember. The reason why we do this, it doesn't matter what we add, we just throw exceptional on there. The reason why we do this is because exceptional is only 8, well, this might be wrong. It's usually about 12. It says 8, but there's only 1 for 6 and then 10 and then 12. I would say it's like 12 chaos on average. The reason why we do this is because of the specific wording on Orb of Conflict. If you read the bottom text, it says, the chance of raising or lowering a modifier depends on its relative strength. That's kind of confusing wording, but what it means is the lower tier modifier has a greater chance of being improved. Also, the way that numbers work, saying lower or higher is also confusing. Basically, the worst of the 2 modifiers has a greater chance of being improved when you actually use the Orb of Conflict. So because we were spamming the Grand Ichors to get this, and we put a single exceptional on there, it means that now when I use an Orb of Conflict, there's actually a better chance for this to go up 1 tier and this to go down to 4. So let's see what happens. And this, you're not going to see a change in the number because we have to get it 1 more step up to go to 2. Okay, so it worked. So you'll notice this went to 3. So this is now only 1 step away from going to pierce 2 targets. Now you might think to yourself, okay, so now you just hit it again and hope to get lucky. Not true. What we're going to do now is put another exceptional back on, and it doesn't matter what it is. This is actually a pretty good one. This is really good for if you're going to be farming Pinnacle Atlas bosses. Anyways, so the reason why we put another exceptional is the same theory, because now if we use an Orb of Conflict, it's now just a 50-50. So now we're just hoping to get lucky and get that 50-50 coin toss. Okay, so it didn't work. This went down to tier 4. We wanted it to go to tier 2, and then this one went to tier 2. So now we have an exquisite modifier. Interestingly, this is actually a good modifier that we got lucky with on the exceptional slam. But the only thing to do in this situation is simply hit it again. Oh my goodness. Okay, so that was really unlucky. But what just happened was we got a perfect modifier, and this went down to lesser, I believe, or maybe just greater. So instead of us wasting more Orbs of Conflict in this situation, so you get your Grand Ichors back and you start re-rolling to get that Grand Pierce back on the table. Oh, that didn't take long. So that was only 5. And now that you have a Grand, now that you have a Grand modifier, it's now like really, really unlikely for anything else to happen other than this goes to tier 3. Okay, so it worked. And now that we have a tier 2 modifier, so we have an exquisite modifier, which is better than exceptional. So now we have, once again, a pretty good chance for this to go to tier 2. And there we go. That's how it's done. But at that point, I would just get some grands and just start spamming away until you hit something interesting. There's actually a lot of good options for this particular implicit. I think I used like 2 or 3 and I got attack speed, and I figured, yep, that's probably good enough. Okay, last but not least is the boots. And for the boots, what I did specifically was I wanted to get chaos resistance to bring myself at least above 0. So what I did was I bought pure evasion boots. So there's a mastery that is +1 to ES per 8 evasion on boots. This is obviously nicely paired with Itziri's Step, because Itziri's Step gives you a lot of spell suppression and it gives you a lot of evasion. I chose not to go for Itziri's Step because I decided that I wanted to have more movement speed. So as you can see, I have 28 as well as 11 if I haven't been hit, and then I have 7 on the implicit. So my boots are like, let's see, what is that? 35% movement speed, and that actually goes up to 46 if I haven't been hit recently. So it just feels nice to have a lot of movement speed on the boots. And I didn't need to have all the spell suppression that Itziri's Steps provides, because I managed to roll spell suppression on my gloves and my body. If you want to, you can go for Itziri's Step because it also is pretty affordable, and then you can just forego the necessity of having spell suppression on either of these 2 pieces of gear. One other thing to note is that there are nodes in the tree that we are pretty near that give us more spell suppression. So if you need to, you can spend a couple points to get some spell suppression on the tree. I didn't have to take these ones specifically because I rolled pretty good amounts on my body and my boots and gloves, and because I take Spellbreaker, it gives me 20 right there, which brought me above 100. Anyways, so I wanted to get Chaos Res on the boots. I wanted to have more movement speed. So what I decided to do was find a decent Chaos Res Fracture, because the Chaos Res Fractures are quite expensive. So Slink boots, item level 85 with 29 Fractured Chaos Res. Yeah, they're about 1 divine, right? And what I did was I used the essence that gives me chance to avoid elemental ailments, because this was the perfect amount extra that I needed when combined with the Grand Spectrums that I'm using. So whenever you're running the Grand Spectrum setup that allows you to get a total of 36 elemental ailment avoidance per Grand Spectrum here, this is going to add up to 72. And then all that means is that you need 28 somewhere else, and sure enough, the Shrieking Essence is perfect for 28, which is good because the Deafening variant is quite expensive. Therefore, I was able to spam the cheaper tier of Essence to get the 28 chance to avoid elemental elements, and that gave me the perfect 100% element avoided status. And I did that until I hit a good suffix, which was simply the chance to suppress spell damage, which is a very good suffix. At that point, I simply locked the suffixes with suffixes cannot be changed, and then I hit it with a Veil Orb to get movement speed. I'm just going to come in here and put any random suffix on because that doesn't really matter for this demonstration. So let's say you have 3 perfect suffixes, and then you do the 2 divine cost of suffixes cannot be changed. At this point, if you Veil Orb Slam, this is what you're going to see most of the time. You're usually going to get a veiled prefix, like a single veiled prefix with nothing else added, and then at that point, you can usually add yourself some good tier of movement speed. So this one right here is a little unfortunate because we are already ailment avoided. We don't really need this line of text, but we did get 30% movement speed, so that's nice. Let's go for another one here. So this one is, this is exactly the same one that I got. 28% and then 12 or 11 when you're not hit. So this actually gives a total of 39 if you have not been hit recently. This one right here. So there's also the movement speed and then onslaught, which is quite good. Onslaught on kill is also just more DPS, so that's also pretty good. Occasionally you'll run into a situation you will also add some undesirable prefixes, and that's unfortunate. Like this one right here is not the best. This is a little bit of flat ES, or a little bit of flat evasion, a little bit of flat life. It could be worse, but that's not really great. So the perfect scenario is obviously to Veil Orb Slam into an open prefix as well as a good prefix such as tier 1 life or something. But the whole reason why you're doing this is, oh, this is really nice. The reason why you're doing this is because when you unveil, like I said earlier, you are very likely to get something that gives you some good movement speed. Now there is, of course, a totally different option. So I had to redo this because it kind of bugged out. But there is actually a totally different method, which is simply to get to this point where you have 3 good suffixes, and then you lock the suffixes, and you simply go to Harvest and Reforge Speed. What this is going to do is it will give you some tier of movement speed every single time, because that's the only possible modifier with the tag of speed. However, like I'm sure you're noticing, if you're paying attention, is that a lot of these times when I'm doing this, the movement speed tier is quite tragic. This is terrible, right? If you don't get anything, if you don't get 25 or better, it's almost not even worth having, and you'd rather like redo the craft, which is possible unless you fill the 2 other prefix slots, which is also entirely possible. I'll keep going until that happens, right? So if you reforge speed, something like this happens, right? Like let's pretend this is like 20%, because this wouldn't be all that bad, but it's still not great. It's only 25%, right? So now you have an item where every modifier slot is filled up. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, and you're not happy with it. Really, the only thing you can do is annul, and like you saw right there, we lost a suffix. So in that situation, that would have been like not good, because obviously all of our suffixes were perfect, or we were at least happy enough with them to afford spending 2 divines on the meta mod, right? One of those good suffixes. And even when you do remove a prefix, in order to redo the craft, you have to then obviously go back to the bench and pay for another 2 divines to do this again, and then reforge speed once again, where it is, of course, then possible to get a situation like this, where now you have, oh, great, I did it again and I have 10% movement speed. That's why I am a strong advocate for the Veil Orb Slam, because even if you get some shitty suffixes, or even if you get some shitty mods with the slam, which, trust me, tends to not happen as much as you'd think. It usually ends up like this. Oh, that's interesting, right? This is a pretty rare occurrence. But yeah, it is possible to just straight up give yourself speed, and then you have whatever the fuck this is. Like, hey, cool, we got 56 life and regen mana. Like that's great. Now I have an open prefix to craft, increased energy shield or increased evasion, right? I just kind of feel like on average, the results of the Veil Orb Slam is going to be more beneficial than Reforged Speed. I truly believe that is the case, and I would suggest that you do that yourself. But of course, to each his own, whatever you feel more comfortable with, go for it. Okay, so if you are going for the Grand Spectrum setup, that'll take up 3 of your 5 jewel sockets. If you're using a cluster jewel and you have the 2 added from the mediums, you do only have a total of 5 jewel sockets in the build. Unfortunately, if you were to check, you will find that the closest other jewel sockets are too far away. So then we have one available for a Watcher's Eye, and then the next one is going to be the Seething Fury. Mandatory, guaranteed 100%. I promise you will never find a jewel better than this. It is insanely, insanely good. So if you notice, when I have this unsocketed, right, I have only 29.6% crit chance and 441 crit multiplier on my offhand. When I put this jewel in, this goes all the way to 63, and it goes to 593 for the crit multi. That is a gigantic leap in DPS. It's incredibly good, and it's a very cheap jewel. And because it's a cheap jewel, it means you can get certain implicits for relatively cheap as well. The reason why it's so good is because this gives you a base amount of crit chance, which is totally different than an increased amount of crit chance. What that means is all the increases that we have in our build elsewhere that affects our base crit chance, which is massive when you take into consideration the fact that our shield has so much energy shield. This is giving me a base amount of 5.7 crit chance to my offhand, which is gigantic. And then also we're getting 4 crit multi, which is 152, which is so good. This jewel is unmatched by anything else. The only thing left to talk about is the Ascendencies and then the cluster jewels. So for the Ascendencies, because I am 100% elemental element avoided because of the Grand Spectrums, I decided not to take one step ahead. So one step ahead is a really strong, really good quality of life node. However, part of the value of one step ahead is the fact that because your action speed can't be lowered, it basically makes you chill and freeze immune. However, if you are ailment immune, you are already getting that benefit anyways, therefore it's less value to actually spend your points here. And I decided that Spellbreaker was going to be a better use of my points. I was able to take a few less points on the tree. So I was able to unspec from here and unspec from these 2 nodes in order to maintain 100 plus spell suppression. If you're doing the build that makes use of a ton of frenzy charges, then definitely go for Swift Killer. That's a no-brainer. And then Heartstopper is probably a no-go no matter who you are, because in my opinion, a defensive layer that is only active, like where it has like specific mechanics that are active and then inactive at different times, where that time might not necessarily line up with when you would need it to. I don't like that idea. I think that's kind of a bad mechanic. Hey, I'm just gonna pause the video once again because wouldn't you know it, I forgot something else that's quite important. So I totally didn't even talk about the other 2 Ascendencies that I have allocated, and that's simply because I consider those to be mandatory, and the ones that I discussed were the ones that I would consider to be a flex option. So anyways, I'll cover them right now really quickly. So Polymath is incredibly good because it gives us 3% more damage for each type of mastery, and we end up taking a lot of masteries. We take 12 total, which means we're getting 36% more damage. So that's really good. And all of the life on kill, energy shield, mana on kill is also just a nice bonus on top of that. And then down there you have Soul Drinker, and this is also just incredibly good. This is our method of overleech, which means whenever we are leeching energy shield, which is all the time, we do not stop leeching when the energy shield is full. As long as we're attacking, we are leeching. Therefore, we get a ton of extra benefits from being in the leeching status. Some other builds can't really take advantage of this. They only can get that bonus whenever they are actually leeching. Typically, if the energy shield reaches the full or the life reaches full, you would stop leeching. But our build is at all times leeching energy shield, so that's why Soul Drinker is also what I would consider to be mandatory. So that's about it. The last thing to talk about is the cluster jewels. So you'll notice that I am not making use of the node here, and that is simply because the mediums that we have, Eye to Eye and Repeater, Eye to Eye and Repeater are both so incredibly strong compared to any of these points that it is just way more worth it for you to use points on these than it is to get to do these. However, of course, once I level up 2 more times, this is definitely going to be where my points are going. However, you might notice I have Devastator. So this is not actually the best large cluster node. I got this originally just to try it because it sounded good, the whole chance to explode thing sounded like it would be really nice. But once I tried it out and then unspec'd it, I didn't notice any difference. It seems to be that this skill kind of already explodes enemies because of like the way that freezing and shattering works. Yeah, I don't really think that Devastator does anything for the build all that much. The better node here is going to be Feed the Fury. So the best in slot large cluster is Martial Prowess, Fuel the Fight, which this is necessary. So the only node on your large cluster jewel which is actually necessary is going to be Fuel the Fight. This is where we leech our mana. We have mana on kill from other areas of the build, but in terms of like fighting a strong enemy where you're not going to be killing in order to continue casting, you're going to need to have mana leech. And if you don't have Fuel the Fight, you're going to need to find mana leech elsewhere. It can be on rings or probably some other piece of gear that I can't think of. But before you are able to socket a large cluster that has this, I would suggest you just simply use a mana flask that has the enduring mod, so that whenever your mana is full, the effect of the flask will still continue for the full duration of the flask. Basically, that means that you are constantly regenerating mana, even when the flask would normally end because your mana goes to full. So an enduring mana flask is a nice band-aid fix to have before you can actually spec into a large cluster. But yeah, like I said, that's really all there is to it. These are pretty expensive though. So if you do want to get yourself a 8 passive skills, attack damage and or attack damage when holding a shield, large cluster that has those 3 good nodes that I mentioned, I think the last time I checked it was like 6 divines. So it's kind of expensive, but like I said, Fuel the Fight is really the only mandatory one. There's a lot of other ones that you can probably find for cheaper that still end up giving you some damage. If you are on a budget, there's definitely a lot of cheaper options than just what people consider to be the best in slot large cluster. So take a look at Craft of Exile, take a look at your options there. You can swap between looking for increased attack damage as well as 12% when holding a shield. Obviously that's going to be better, but the truth is that the difference between having that 10 or 12 is only ever going to give you a slight, you know, it's only ever going to make us very slight difference. It would, in my particular setup right now, it would literally only be giving me 2% more attack damage had I have gone for the better one. So I went for this one instead because it was cheaper at the time. So yeah, you have a lot of options is what I'm trying to say. And then for the mediums, these are actually quite affordable. So like I mentioned, Eye to Eye and Repeater are by far the best option, and it's only like 60 chaos. These are pretty easy to roll, so they're often made and sold for a lot of different builds, not just this build, obviously. So yeah, these mediums are very affordable compared to the large cluster price. And that is honestly about it. We've basically covered everything about the build. I've covered all the gear, the jewels, how I think it's rated for my personal rating system and all that. A lot of different little intricacies about the build. And to be honest with you, I really like the build. What I wanted to get out of this video was I wanted to create a video from my perspective, from my take on the build, which is very similar to a lot of others on the, you know, if you look at a PoE Ninja build, you'll find that we do a lot of the same things. But this was my experience when it comes to searching the market, buying items, and crafting items. So take it with a grain of salt, because I'm sure there's a lot of different ways to do things. I wanted to just give you my example and something that you could potentially use as like a jumping off point to start searching for different pieces of your build that you might figure out how to do on your own. So yeah, and if you were considering playing this skill and you were thinking like, hey, what's it like when I put some investment into it? I can tell you, like I said earlier, I put about 85 divines into it and it feels really, really good. So yeah, that's really all I wanted to talk about. Thanks for watching. I hope this video was helpful. I hope it was entertaining. And I hope you stay tuned for some more Path of Exile content in the future.